Hi, this is Jake Northey with another update from Creative Minds. Today we're going to talk about one of the most wasteful exercises I see organizations participate in. It's planning. Now, planning in general isn't wasteful, but I think a lot of organizations spend a lot of time planning and not enough time executing. One of my favorite quotes, Dwight Eisenhower said, "Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." So the act of planning itself wasteful, but organizations spend a lot of time planning and they end up planning in too much detail way ahead of when the execution happens. And that's where the waste comes in. If you're planning in detail something that's not going to be executed for 6 months, a year, or even later, what happens is you have to keep rekindling that conversation, that knowledge transfer, the information. And during that time, you might assign work to a different team, or the plans that are being made are being executed in a different way than you had actually planned, right? And so you're bringing more people into the fold, getting knowledge transfer, rediscussing the same points over and over again. It's a very wasteful exercise. So in our opinion, planning is indispensable. It's the right planning that's important, right? We have to plan just far enough ahead to execute, right? If we look at Scrum, we only really need to know what we're working on in the 2 weeks with a little buffer in case our team is working ahead of schedule. That's the minimum amount of planning we need to do for Scrum. Other processes like SAFe might plan out 3 months, but going into detail any length beyond 3 months is actually really, really wasteful. So a lot of times in Agile, we're planning just enough to know what the team's going to build. And so that planning and execution, it happens fast. We plan a week in advance of the sprint. We have 2 weeks of development. And then what we've planned, what we've thought about, it's shipped. It's ready to go. We don't have to think about it anymore. We don't have to talk about it anymore. So at the most, we have a week of talking about what we're building before we actually build it. And once that's shipped, we really don't have to think about it until we come back and talk about improvements to it. So I don't want to do too much planning, is because so much can change from planning to execution. And if you're planning well in advance, what you're not taking into account for is everything you're learning about your customers, everything you're learning about your product, and everything else you're building in that time. So if I'm planning 6 months out and we get to 6 months and we're ready to execute, guaranteed something's going to change. The work that you planned is going to change in some way. And so that whole 6 months between planning and execution, you're talking about it, you're thinking about it, it's on people's minds, the cognitive load is there. And so now you're in the position where maybe we stick to the plans because we think they're good and we don't refine them, or we're kind of replanning. We're changing the plans. We're going over the plans again and seeing, what needs to be different this time, right? So in our mind, planning is great. Planning is important, but we're just going to try to minimize the amount of planning so that we're planning just enough and realize that, hey, you might have good ideas today, capture them at a high level. Don't go into detail until you get closer to execution, because the closer you are to execution, the more you're going to know by the time you actually execute those plans. Right? You're going to know a lot more about every detail of your customers and the product. Find things that aren't unnecessary. You might plan something, you get feedback from customers, and that whole area of the product is unused, and you don't even want to go down that road anymore, right? So that's an important piece of executing software product. Is really, it's easy to kind of have all these ideas and go way out wide and have all these little pieces that you want to plan out and hope to execute in the future, but you need to be disciplined. Only plan, only execute the things that are important at the moment, right? Another related thing is getting too many people involved in the plan. So what tends to happen is we're planning something and then it's like, well, we need to pass this by our architecture team, we need to pass this by our UX team, we need to pass this by product management, we need to get engineering involved. And so now what happens is you have decision makers across all these different functional areas, and the plans actually take longer. This is why some organizations actually end up planning a long time, is because they're actually working with many different parts of the organization to get plans essentially approved. That rarely works. That really slows down the whole process. So what you really want to do as an organization is create smaller teams and entrust them with actually coming up with the execution and design of the plans and how they're going to do it, as opposed to starting with a plan and then getting approval and buy-in and participation from all the different organizations, right? Those stakeholders, PM, UX, architecture, they do have to be involved, but treat them more as like trusted advisors, right? As if I'm a team and I have something that really needs a little help from architecture, instead of trying to plan something and have the architect prove it, maybe ask for the architect to help craft, the important parts of the plan that you have. So this hurts from two ways. One is it just slows down actually getting to the execution stage. Teams can be waiting for approval before they can actually start work. On the other side, those decision makers, the cognitive load is huge, right? They have to be involved in so many decisions across a large product and a large project. And ultimately, it really weighs down their ability to do their job well because they have to be involved. And so the thing that organizations can do is break their problem into smaller subsystems and give teams the trust and ownership over those subsystems. That way, they don't have to know other parts of the system. They can focus on their own subsystem. And if you trust them to do a good job, they're going to be more motivated to do a great job. They're going to have ownership of what they build. People naturally want to build and do things well. They take pride in their quality. And if you give them the ownership, the quality is going to go way, way up. And the ownership is going to be there. If they have authority, they're going to feel responsibility and ownership. And the trust is going to give them the motivation to do a good job. When we're looking at large, ambitious software projects, that's the number one thing, is looking at how much detail you're planning at. You can plan 3, 5, 10 years out in the future, but at that level, you need to have, just line items. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to be? Where do we want to be at this point? When we get into the detail, we only want to get into detail right before we're executing, because that's going to have the most success. If we plan today and do it tomorrow, the difference between the plan and execution is going to be small. We can be pretty well assured that what we plan is going to be executed in that time frame. And so keeping the smallest time unit as possible for our planning and execution is what's going to give us a lot of success. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video today. For more tips and best practices in software development, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and like this video.